Hi everyone, from me, Brent Graham of Goodforthegame.co.za, and welcome to this special edition of the Super Rugby Week 3 preview. We're coming to you live South African time at 8:30 on a Wednesday night, and that's to make sure we get you those picks nice and early. And Nathan couldn't make the what do we normally do, the New Zealand Thursday night time, so we moved it forward. And let's welcome in now Nathan, the Moss Man. Good to have you back in the studio there, Nathan. Let me just drop this off so we can see you. Good to have you back in, man. We were just quickly chatting. We didn't have very long, but you were saying a bit of a mixed bag in Super Rugby for you last week, but nicely done in URC.
Yeah, URC was good to me last week. So I think I went 4-1 in URC, but it could have been a bit better actually, because the model that I'm running I think was on the right side of sort of 7 out of the 8 games. So yeah, probably could have trusted my numbers a little bit more actually.
Excellent. I must say we get some really great feedback on your or both yourself and also your tips as well. A lot of guys are asking me, do you have a website and that sort of stuff as well? So yeah, we're really great to chat a bit of rugby betting. Now, am I right in saying we've got Super Rugby teams? I know you said, I think it normally comes out a Wednesday afternoon your time, so we've got the teams already as well?
They're all out, that's right.
Excellent. Well, as we go, if you do have any good bets, let us know in the comments section, and also down, if you're watching the recording of the show, let us know in the comments box down below the show. We've got Mark Dunphy from Ireland watching. Mark looking very forward to England against Ireland. I know he got a little bit of Ireland -6.5 early in the week. I've just got the outright betting scrolling at the bottom there, Nathan. Chiefs have firmed slightly 31-20. The Blues have sort of replaced the Crusaders now as second favourites. Any team really after 2 weeks has impressed you and you would say is looking a good thing for the win?
I mean, I said at the start of the season, Chiefs Blues, and I think that looks pretty good, to be fair. Not a lot's going to change. I mean, the reality is there were probably only 3 teams that were highly fancied or had a realistic chance coming in. And truth is, it might be down to 2 already.
Yeah, fair enough after that Crusaders performance. Welcome to the Admiral coming in. And Mark saying, nice jersey, Brent. The story behind this, of course, is that Mark sent me this Leinster jersey, so I would start tipping Leinster more on the show. But yeah, Mark, as you can see, still my favorite jersey. Right, let's get into the action. We got Moana Pasifika +5.5 against the Rebels. Pasifika, well, I hit them on the board last week, so I had a pretty good weekend of Super Rugby. I went for high-scoring games, and as you know, there were plenty of them. It was just the Jolly Crusaders that I picked wrong in terms of, and that was unfortunately in a lot of multiples on that. I had a good weekend. It should have been a great one. I was on Pasifika, and I was also on Rebels over 31.5 points. They won 5 points after 33 minutes, and they stormed in to score another 43. They are the favourites here against Pasifika. This game, I believe, is being played in Hamilton, Nathan.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, they had problems with the turf, I think, at North Harbour Stadium, so they've moved to Waikato Stadium. So it's not really a true home game for Moana. They'll get some support, I think, going around the country, but the traditional heartland is South Auckland. That's why they play at Mount Smart. I think even at North Harbour Stadium, they would have probably got a reasonable turnout. At Waikato Stadium, not so sure how much advantage they're really getting from that. This line opened at 1.5 at the TAB in New Zealand. I wasn't quick enough to get to that. Did get to 2.5, and then it's kind of progressed from there. I'm seeing 5.5 on screen, which is something that's either changed overnight. When I was looking at it last, it was 4.5. I still favour the Rebels here. I think that in terms of priors, I mean, you always want to be a little bit cautious about updating things too quickly in the early part of the season. Moana, I think they are better, but the Rebels were good last year, and they were a good team to back. And I think sort of not willing necessarily to abandon the Rebels this early in the season. So there were some decent signs in their comeback against the Force. We expected that they would improve, I guess, on that Brumbies performance, and they did. So yeah, as I said, I'm already on the Rebels. 5.5 is kind of starting to get up there, but my numbers would still favour the Rebels. And one other thing I'd say, actually, because I've been sort of in the back cave in the lab working on some stuff, and I've got something around total points, which I'm reasonably happy with. So it's kind of at this stage, I'd say it's partly experimental, but given that Chris isn't here, it's quite a good thing to be able to do. And I've got this game going over that points line as well. From memory, I think I might have already had a bet on this one, but it's a problem when you've got so many bets going, is sometimes you lose track of which ones you're actually on.
100%. Yeah, I actually like the points here a little bit as well. And I'm glad to hear you're getting involved in the points line. So look forward to hearing how you refine that tool. And just to mention to people that we do have a show tomorrow night, our normal show. We'll cover Six Nations and Super Rugby, and we'll definitely talk a bit more total points on there as well. We got Harry Jones on, and potentially the Crow Tips might be joining us as well. Henrik's going to take a week off. Let's move into the next game, though. What have we got here? Just scanning up. We got the Waratahs at -3.5 against the Highlanders. I mean, you would not have expected this handicap if we were talking a week ago and I said, hey, what do you think the handicap's going to be Waratahs Highlanders? I don't think any of us would probably have made them favourites, but on the basis of that performance against Crusaders, wow, they look pretty, as much as I think the Crusaders were pretty poor, the Waratahs impressed me.
Yeah, I think you're right. And this kind of goes back to, maybe reading too much into individual games. I mean, we spoke actually about that fixture last week and said that at that point you were pretty much buying low on the Waratahs and potentially buying a little bit high on the Crusaders. And I think that's kind of how things panned out at that point. But now you've got the exact opposite situation, right? Which is you're kind of buying high on the Waratahs. And again, I'm not going to get too carried away with a single performance. The Waratahs have actually beaten the Crusaders in past years when it was a far better, Crusaders outfit than probably what we're seeing this year. So those one-off performances do happen, and if you're making, well, potentially if what you're saying is, if the line could have been flipped coming into the week, then that's a huge adjustment to be making from week to week, too much in my opinion. You never really should be adjusting any team that much. They usually regress back to what they truly are. So the Highlanders, I think, what we're seeing with them, I think, is they've got a proper 10 for the first time in a while, with no respect to sort of Freddie Burns, who I think, was maybe here on a bit of a holiday, and Mitch Hunt, who wasn't terrible like some people suggested, but, wasn't a class player. So I think maybe you're seeing the benefit of that. So I'm on the Highlanders here. I think this is, the numbers sort of been pretty stable. I think there were 4.5s available kind of earlier in the week, which is when I took it. But I'm still quite keen on the Highlanders here.
Right. And have you pushed the total points through your algorithm here? Anything popped out there?
No, I've got it sort of right around 58. So, yeah, it's not something that's there's not a strong enough lean really to jump in general, with the numbers that get produced. Once you take rounding and stuff into account, then it's just it's kind of a stay away. But I did see the Admiral there pop up and talk about the 1 to 12 on the Highlanders, and I just swapped a couple of tweets with him yesterday, I think it was, just about a bet that he had last week on the 1 to 12. Well, it was not. Sorry, he had put on the 1 to 12. He'd used a bet builder, which I think it had the Hurricanes win, and then the Reds to cover. And the odds for that were $3.10. Now, the exact equivalent, the exact equivalent bet, if you'd taken the 1 to 12, which is what he's suggesting here, was paying $2.40, I think it was. So it's a massive difference. And it sounds like it's probably just something that the same game parlay, same game multi bet builder, whatever you want to call it, depending on which lingo you use. Those algorithms are very difficult for bookmakers to get right, and I think they still make mistakes with those things from time to time. It sounds like this might just be a mistake that they've made. So how long a advantage like that lasts for, I don't know, but it's definitely something to look at.
Yeah, no, for sure. Funny, I saw that tweet and I saw your response to it down below as well, because the first thing I did when I saw that tweet was thought, gee, that's a nice price on effectively the 1 to 12. And I was actually going to tweet it, and you'd beaten me to it. So, yeah, very interesting. I've never got involved with the bet builders, and not all of the South African bookmakers offer it. So definitely something I'd have to look at. I must admit, I used to tease the Crow Tips a little bit about his bet builders, and if he's watching the show, he's probably going to be going, here we go. Finally brought you around to those bet builders.
I mean, and to be fair, some of them are ridiculous, and the problem is that you have no real way to calculate if there is a positive EV bet in there somewhere. Even with this one, I'm not really too sure, because the thing is with that 4-way price, you could sit down and kind of work it out. It's probably heavily juiced. And you can't really tell, when you've got multi-runner markets, like in the same way as you can with a handicap. So it could be that it was just, this is actually the true price. 310 is the true price. and that the 240 is just a horribly juiced number that you should never take.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And look, I must say, often on that market in that sort of game, you can, some of our bookies, you can get closer to sort of 270 or whatever. But I suspect you're probably right on that one. It's quite difficult to know where you stand there. But I must say, one thing I've noticed here, Nathan, with these 1 to 12 markets, the bookmakers seem to be a little bit more reluctant to price them up than they were in the past. And I think a couple of shrewd punters have picked up on something, because the markets always used to be out early, and I just find I have to shop around for them a little bit. So perhaps an indication that punters are actually hammering them in these markets. Let's have a look at the next game. But before we do that, just a reminder, if you're new to the channel, you haven't subscribed yet, give us a subscribe. Hit the like button. It does help the channel a lot. Right, let's see what the next game on the card is. We've got a bit of a handicap movement here. The Drua plus 8.5 against the Crusaders. I actually priced this at plus 9.5, so it's kind of approaching where I priced it. But it opened here, I don't know about over there, Nathan, opened here at Drua plus 6.5. So there has been money for the Crusaders. People perhaps thinking they can't possibly deliver two performances like that one week after another. But the Drua, if I remember correctly, did beat the Crusaders by a point last year in Fiji. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. So it got me thinking when you were saying that you'd handicap this game. In terms of your method when you're doing it, I'm assuming that you have some form of power rating, power number that you're using.
I don't. So my method is a little bit simple. I basically look at the game and I go with my gut. So not what I think the final score is obviously going to be, but where I think the handicap will go, and I bang it there. And then when it comes out, and interesting, 3 points is actually the most I was out. But like if there's like a 5-point difference, then I look at the game more carefully and I say, is that now? Are the bookies wrong or am I wrong? And if the bookies are wrong, then I climb. Or if I think the bookies are wrong, I climb in early. But I must say I do very much a gut feel. So yeah, it's generally thereabouts in certain competitions. Like URC, I battle a bit because team selections and this and that. But Super Rugby, I find like a New Zealand derby is the easiest to handicap generally. It's like, home team minus 6.5 type of thing.
Pretty consistent, yeah. No, I think that's something that I'll actually do as well. Without looking at any other number. I'll generally try and just come up with something off the top of my head to see if it's kind of within the same ballpark. But the reason I was asking specifically about this one, I was just wondering that if you were pricing this just off your gut feel, and this was at a neutral ground, like what you would have made the price.
If this was in neutral ground, I probably would have had Crusaders somewhere around minus 17.5 or something around there. A lot bigger than Drua at home, because I do find the Drua are the sort of team who tends to perform just so much better at home.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think kind of where I'm going with this is like how big is the home advantage for the Drua, and I think we can all acknowledge that it's big. I think exactly what it is actually pretty hard to quantify at this point because we don't have a big sample size. There hasn't been enough games played there. I think what will happen over time, though, and I think it's applicable to this game, is that the travel will get a little bit easier in the sense that teams will have done it. They'll know what to expect. They'll understand the conditions, all of those sorts of things. And so over time, I think that home field advantage will decline somewhat. So the Crusaders have done this trip before. They played here, as you said, last year and lost. So we know they're not going to be complacent. We know they'll know what to expect. I actually think that, and there's going to be a little bit of rain around in Lautoka for this game, I think, as well, which, I think will probably suit the Crusaders and how they would want this game to be played, which is probably, a little bit tighter, perhaps a bit more based around set piece, where I'm sure they'll have a pretty big advantage. So, long story short, I like the Crusaders here. I think over time that teams will find this trip a little bit easier. I picked up that 6.5 that you mentioned earlier in the week, but I still make this 8.5 is actually getting up there. I think you could probably find 7.5 still out there, and if you can find the 7.5 on the Crusaders, I'd take that.
Nice confident call on the Crusaders there. That handicap's definitely moving out. Brumbies minus 21.5. As I mentioned to you, I had a bit of a rush before the show to get in here. Had a few emergencies pop up. So have I got that one right? Brumbies minus 21.5 against the Force?
That would have moved. Just one thing I wanted to say about the previous game, actually, and I was talking about the total points. So trying to include, a rain factor in there is quite difficult because you're never really too sure exactly, when you're a few days in advance, how much rain you're going to get, the time it's going to fall, all those sorts of things. Once you get within sort of 48, 24 hours, it's a little bit easier. But in this particular game, I've got the points at 57 for the game, which doesn't include any kind of, weather influence. So when I see something like that, I kind of consider it a bit of a free roll because you've got a game that you already think is going to go under. You've got the potential for rain on top of that. So in general, I like the unders when I see that. And at 59.5, I think, again, there's probably 60s and 60 pluses out there. This is one you could probably wait because I think what will happen is that the number will probably go up because what tends to happen, I think, is that people go, oh, the Drua, well, that game's going to go over. And, when they jump onto it late in the week, especially, the more recreational bettors, they'll probably drive that up a little bit. So, you get something 60 plus, I think I'd probably take the under.
Okay, that's very interesting. I'm really excited to hear you getting into points like this. But it's so true what you say there because, if you said to have that free roll, because at the end of the day, it doesn't work the other way around. Like you can't get that overs free roll because the weather can't. If you're banking on sort of normal weather, then it doesn't really work. But definitely, if you fancy a line and the line actually comes out over, you've always got that chance of weather. And I think it was Mark who mentioned incredibly humid in Fiji, and that is one thing. In Fiji, we often get very tough handling conditions, a little bit like what we get in Durban. Tom just coming in and asking if the travel makes a difference here. I guess in this case, the Crusaders would have had to travel twice, but because the Super Round was in Melbourne, it would be a bit less of a factor because the Drua, of course, would have had to travel back as well.
They're traveling too. Yep. Yeah, 100%.
Excellent. Well, we've already got a comment from Stephen Marks on the next game. This handicap's looking pretty big. I cannot recall what I actually capped this game at, but we've got the Brumbies now minus 21.5, Nathan, and a high points line here of 59.5.
Yeah. So this again, it's sort of a tricky one because I've got a number here that's telling me that the force is the right side, but I'm not sure how much trust I've got in the force at this point, and my gut feel is telling me that the Brumbies will want to bounce back from last week. I think they were kind of embarrassed. They didn't really show up against the Chiefs. So, although, I mean, look, if the cap got big enough, which it probably still, if it's up from, it was 17.5 at one point yesterday. Yeah. So, we've already seen a 4-point move to the number that you've got there. If it keeps going in that direction, there might be an opportunity. Maybe, I might think about the force, but right now I think I'd probably stay off it. But I do have a points line of around about 65. So, again, it's kind of favouring the over.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm just quickly popping onto the Goodforthegame forum. I normally handicap these games on a Sunday night. Okay, interesting. I went Brumbies minus 15.5. So it opened up pretty close to my line, but it's moved out quite quickly. And as you say, normally when the money comes for these sort of teams like the Brumbies now, I'll be surprised if it stops at 21.5. If you do like a force, you may well be worth waiting a little bit and catching a slightly bigger line. It very seldom does the line actually turn around, especially after team news, and go the other direction. See what the guys in the live chat have to say. Brad Breath coming on plus 18.5 was the best he could find earlier. He had a nibble at that. So, Brad, you can always press your bet there. And the Admiral says, looks like it's minus 17 elsewhere. So just to mention, and I did notice that about a couple of their prices. I got the prices off PokerBet, a local bookmaker. And I did notice one or two of theirs were slightly different from the other bookies. So potentially they're either ahead of the curve here and have started pushing this handicap out, or there's a potential to take the force on the plus there. Right, we've got, how many games left now? 2 games left to get through. This is a very interesting one, Nathan. We've got the New Zealand Derby, Hurricanes plus 2.5 against the Blues. Funny, that handicap I didn't get off PokerBet. I got it off World Sports Betting because PokerBet didn't have a cap. They pretty much had this a choice game. And I think the majority of bookies about plus 2.5 Hurricanes.
Yeah, you're right. This is the interesting game in some ways. And so in terms of sort of approaching something like this, maybe just a little bit of insight. So this fixture last year, it was the Canes at home, beat the Blues. I think it was round 3, roundabout. So, similar sort of similar time of year, all that kind of thing. So that game closed, the line closed 5.5. and it landed 6. So, you'd say the line was around about right, given that. So if you fast forward to this year and you look at the teams that have come out and the teams that played in the last game, they're relatively similar. There's probably a few missing on both sides. Geordie, for instance, Bowden was playing at that time for the Blues, but whether Perifetta is a big downgrade at this stage in Bowden's career, I think you could debate that. So kind of a few pluses and minuses. I think it's difficult to say, which team is kind of stronger compared to the same time last year. So effectively what we're saying when we're looking at 2.5 is that there's some sort of narrative that the Hurricanes have taken a step forward from where they were last year, or the Blues have regressed, because that's what it takes. Because 5.5 to 2.5 might not sound like a lot, but if it's actually quite huge, like in the context of how good these teams are. So I mean, I'm not hearing or anything that's telling me that the Crusaders have sort of become, not the Crusaders, the Hurricanes have become some sort of title contender, and the Blues have somehow stepped back from where they are last year. So I can't really get to 2.5 here. I'm not really understanding where this is coming from, So all that is said, like the numbers are one thing, but I think looking at past lines is important, because that's got all that market information in it, right? And we can say that at that point, that was everything that we kind of knew about this fixture. And fast forwarding, I don't really see that a lot has changed. So, for me, I think it probably still should be around that 5.5. But, as I said, that's actually not what my numbers are telling me. That's what sort of more like a market analysis would tell me.
And tell me something, because I didn't get a chance to look at the team selections of that. The Blues rested a couple of players last week. Are they back to sort of what you'd call full strength this week?
Not quite. So they brought Rico back, but they have rotated a little bit in the front row. So Tuamafasi is probably not rested, because he did play in week 1, so I don't quite understand how that one's working. Hoskins Tutu, which is not an All Black resting, but he is actually on the bench. So they've kind of strengthened in some areas and then kind of rotated a little bit in others. I don't think it's like hugely different, but having Satutu on the bench, I think is huge. It would be different if he wasn't there at all, because he's been massive for them. So that's kind of a long story, but it does sort of I guess show how there are different ways to handicap things that aren't necessarily just a sort of data driven, number driven like that. I think looking at some of these other factors is important as well. So I'm on the Blues. I had a 1.5 that I found earlier in the week, and I've seen, it's interesting because that you've got 2.5 up there, but I've seen sort of 3.5s drifting towards 4. And I haven't looked this morning because it's quite early and I didn't have a chance to jump on and have a look. So I don't quite know where it's at now. I can actually have a quick look while we're talking.
And while you're looking there, Nathan, I'll tell you about a bet I had earlier in the week. You'll enjoy this one. Varsity Cup South Africa. I went over, early in the day, there was over 58.5 points in the one game, and I hesitated because I wasn't sure about the weather. Then eventually it was 60.5 come kickoff. So what do? I back the overs. The hooter goes. The scores, what was the score? There were 52 points in the game. The hooter goes, and I win my bet. See if you can figure that out. There's a 7-point try if they score from their own half.
Right.
And so I'd pretty much written it off. And then they scored the 7-point try. It goes to 59 and was in the corner. And I think, well, sure, I should have taken the 58.5. And then the conversion actually, they didn't show the conversion, but thank goodness it went over.
Right.
And I was just laughing to myself because I was thinking anybody else around the world is thinking, you're dead. And here comes this 9-point converted try.
Yeah, you'd already ripped the ticket up. So I'm seeing 4.5 on Bet365. So yeah, I think the money's heading in that direction, which I think is kind of interesting. Like my gut reaction when the teams came out was that the Blues were probably a little bit weaker than I thought they were going to be. But the market sentiment is with the Blues. As I said, like my kind of analysis based on last year's fixture is on the Blues, and I think it's at 2.5. It's definitely the Blues are the right side.
Let me quickly go back. I just want to, because I think it's, I just want to check. Because first of all, I did make one mix up. PokerBet had suspended the handicap, but the choice I saw was actually on the total points line. But yeah, interesting. World Sports Betting in South Africa still have the plus 2.5 at 9 to 10. So definitely, I think the advice is, and I did say on Twitter that we might move a few markets here, Nathan. And I think the advice is if you can get the 2.5, take it now, because one thing for sure, it's definitely not going to be there come kickoff, or probably even come tomorrow morning South African time. Right, let's move on to the final game of the Super Rugby card. We've got the Reds here plus 12.5 against the Chiefs, and a points line of 55.5.
Yeah, this one's been kind of all over the place, really, because I know in New Zealand at the TAB it opened at 15.5. I saw it bet down to 9.5 in places, and then after the teams came out, it rebounded. And I thought that was a strange line move, because it wasn't like on the Reds side that we didn't know that Pataya and Paisami were going to be out. I mean, they were going through concussion protocols and they weren't going to play. So it's kind of interesting, because it sort of tells you that maybe the betting public or betting on these are not as educated as maybe you think, because anybody that was really paying any attention would have understood that the Reds were going to be missing those two players, and the rest of the lineup is pretty much exactly as you would have expected. When the Chiefs came out, that actually rotated a few, which I expected the line to possibly go in the other way. I was sort of hoping that maybe there would be an 8.5 or something pop up, which I thought would have been a great bet, because my numbers still heavily favour the Chiefs here. Well, I say heavily, but it's probably a point or two short. But so it was kind of strange, because I did expect that the 9.5 would stick around, or maybe even an 8.5. So I'm kind of a little bit surprised that it has gone to the 12. And at 12.5, I'd say I'd probably potentially leave that. But I think even there was a comment, I think, in the chat just now, that there was still 9.5s around. So I think if you shop, you're going to find a better number than that, because there is quite a wide.
I just quickly looked at World Sports Betting. Okay, they're 17 to 20, not 9 to 10, but they've got plus 10.5. So as you say, shop around. I mean, that's one thing as a punter. If you want to take your punting fairly seriously and give yourself a chance of winning, you need multiple accounts, and you need to shop around. And I know you do that, Nathan, without a doubt, because a point here or there can make all the difference come the end of the year when you've placed 500 bets.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, and it's not just the points line, or the line in general as well. It's also the price. So it's one thing for us to be talking about 12.5 here, but there's a huge difference between $12.5, $1.80, between $1.90, and it doesn't always seem that way. But what you'll find is that if you're winning, but you're sort of winning on around the sort of $1.80 to $1.85 mark versus those higher marks, you're not actually making up for the losses. You're not gaining. So you could have a weekend where you sort of went 5 and 4 or something, and you might break even. You may not even break even. With a winning record. So it's something that you actually do need to pay attention to. Is getting the best price that you can, because ultimately it does add up.
Yeah, I always say try and support the bookmakers who give you at least what you'd call $1.90. I'd normally say 9 to 10 on the fraction, as opposed to those who bet 17 to 20 the pair. But having said that, if that bookie is a limit, you're often forced to go look, unfortunately, for the 17 to 20 there. Right, that brings us to the end of that, Nathan. Just a quick one for you before we get on to the best bets. I know you're not Six Nations is not necessarily your favorite tournament from a betting point of view. And that's because, all the homework's been done. It's like there's not a lot of movement in the prices generally, although I know there was a bit of movement on Ireland this week. But anything stand out for you on the card?
No. I mean, part of the reason why I think we had to move the time for this is it's just work-wise this week has got a lot on. So, I haven't even had a chance to sort of cast my eye over it. I just quite like watching the games. It was something when I lived in the UK, you kind of get into the habit of watching them. There's always plenty of drama around those things. I'll just be an interested observer.
Excellent. Mark Dunphy saying, is Nathan in New Zealand? Yes, he is. You're in Auckland, Nathan?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Auckland. Yeah, 100%. Stephen Mark's coming, a best bet, Rebels, a minus. Well, let's see what, of the Super Rugby games here, let's see what Nathan's best bet's going to be for the weekend.
So I think I actually agree. I think the Rebels are a good bet. Again, it's sort of based on what's still out there in terms of prices, but I still think that the Highlanders are are a good bet at the current number, and the Crusaders as well. I'm surprised the Crusaders number hasn't moved more. I think it should have. I think that's a good bet too.
Excellent. Sorry, I just see a video call coming through. That's actually Harry Jones. I hope he hasn't come in a little bit early to the show. But Nathan, thanks very much. Thanks to all the guys who joined us in the live chat and watched the show live. Have a cracking weekend. And Nathan, I know you've got a hectic couple of days running around and evening functions and that. So enjoy that and settle in and enjoy the rugby. I hope it's a good weekend of punting for you.
Cheers. You too.
Thanks, everyone. Remember that we